My parents emptied my college fund and gave it to my brother for his influencer trip, calling it a better investment. They didn't know their aspiring lawyer of a daughter understood something they didn't. The IRS doesn't take kindly to unreported six-figure gifts. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The news didn't come with a bang, but with the quiet, smug finality of a verdict already decided. It was a Sunday evening, the kind that smelled of roasted chicken and fading weekend warmth. I was sitting at the dining table, a stack of constitutional law textbooks on one side and my laptop on the other, trying to get a head start on the week's readings. I'd been battling a nasty head cold for days, the kind that left my sinuses screaming and my throat feeling like sandpaper. All I wanted was a cup of tea and my bed. Instead, I got a family meeting. "Angela, honey, can you put that away for a second?" My mother, Linda, smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was her corporate smile, the one she used on clients she was about to overcharge. My father, Robert, stood behind her, his arms crossed, wearing an identical expression of forced pleasantry. My brother, Ethan, was slouched on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, a picture of detached nonchalance. I closed my laptop, a prickle of unease working its way through the fog of my cold. "What's up?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Well," my father began, stepping forward to take his seat at the head of the table. "We have some exciting family news. Ethan has decided to take the leap." I glanced at Ethan. His leaps were frequent and always in different directions. Last month, it was a podcast about cryptocurrency. Before that, an artisanal pickle company that never produced a single pickle. This time, however, his grin was wider, more self-assured. "I'm going to be a travel influencer," he announced, as if he were declaring his candidacy for president. "Full-time. I'm starting with a year-long trip across Southeast Asia to build my brand." I blinked, processing the sheer absurdity. "An influencer? Ethan, you get carsick on the bus." His face tightened. "It's about the aesthetic, Angela. The content, you wouldn't get it." "And how are you funding this aesthetic?" I asked, my gaze shifting to my parents. I knew Ethan didn't have two nickels to rub together. This was the moment. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was cool, her grip firm. "That's the other part of the news, honey. Your father and I have been talking. We think Ethan's venture has incredible potential. Real-world experience, branding, networking, it's the future." "What are you talking about?" My voice was barely a whisper. A cold dread, far worse than my lingering fever, was beginning to seep into my bones. My father cleared his throat. "We've decided to make an investment in his future. We've given him your college fund." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. For a moment, I was sure I'd misheard them through the haze of my illness. The college fund. The $80,000 my grandparents had meticulously saved for me, an untouchable trust meant to ensure I could go to law school without the crushing weight of debt. My parents were merely the custodians, the guardians of a gift that was never theirs to give. "You did what?" "Now, Angela, don't get hysterical," Linda said, her voice taking on a patronizing edge. "We didn't make this decision lightly. We see so much drive in Ethan. Law school is, well, it's a safe path, a predictable one. This," she said, gesturing toward Ethan, who was now smirking, "is a chance for our family to build something truly big." I pulled my hand out from under hers. The room felt tilted, the air thin. I looked at my brother, the golden child, who had never held a job for more than 6 months, whose greatest ambition was to be admired for doing nothing of substance. Then I looked at my parents, who saw his fecklessness as flair and my diligence as a lack of imagination. They weren't just taking my money. They were taking my future, the one I had spent years meticulously planning and working for, and handing it to him on a silver platter. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The 24 hours that followed their announcement were a blur of enforced politeness. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't give them the satisfaction of the dramatic breakdown they were so clearly braced for. Instead, a strange, icy calm settled over me. I retreated to my room, the textbooks on my desk now seeming like relics from a past life. I could hear their cheerful chatter downstairs, the clinking of glasses as they toasted Ethan's brilliant future. They were celebrating the theft of mine. The next afternoon, Ethan knocked on my door. He didn't wait for an answer, just pushed it open and leaned against the frame, holding a brand new drone in its box. "Pretty sick, right?" he said, shaking it slightly. "Top of the line. Going to get some epic shots of the temples in Cambodia with this thing." I just stared at him from my bed, where I was propped up against a mountain of pillows, feeling feverish and hollowed out. "That's nice, Ethan." He sauntered in, placing the drone on my desk with a proprietary air. "Look, I know you're probably a little bent out of shape about the whole college fund thing." "A little," I echoed, my voice flat. "But you've got to see the big picture," he continued, completely missing my sarcasm. "This is an investment for all of us. When my channel blows up, I'll pay Mom and Dad back and then some. You can have whatever you want for law school. I'll probably be rich enough to buy you your own law firm by then." He laughed, a confident, booming sound that made my head throb. It was the casual arrogance that struck me the most. The absolute certainty that he was entitled to this, that his unproven dream was inherently more valuable than my tangible, hard-earned ambitions. He saw my fund not as a betrayal, but as a seed investment he was graciously accepting. My mother called me on my cell phone later that evening. I was at the campus library, surrounded by the comforting silence of whispered pages and studious concentration. I had fled the house, unable to bear the celebratory atmosphere. "Angela, honey, your father and I are taking Ethan out for a special dinner to celebrate his departure. We were hoping you'd join us." Her voice was laced with that saccharine sweetness she used when she wanted to smooth things over without ever admitting fault. "I can't. I have to study," I said, my eyes scanning a page of contract law without reading a single word. A sigh crackled through the phone. "Angela, please don't be like this. We did what we thought was best. You're smart, you'll get scholarships. You always land on your feet. Ethan, he needs this push. He needs to know we believe in him." That was it right there. I was the dependable one, the safe bet, so my security could be gambled away. Ethan was the risk, so he had to be cushioned with my safety net. The logic was so twisted, so deeply unfair, that it almost defied comprehension. "I understand," I said, my voice as even as I could make it. "I hope he has a wonderful time." "That's my girl," she said, relieved. "We'll bring you back some dessert." As I hung up, a thought began to form in the back of my mind, a small, sharp point of light in the fog of my anger and grief. They were so focused on the grand narrative, on Ethan's potential and my perceived resilience. They were business people, or so they liked to think, but their vision was clouded by favoritism. They saw the big, shiny picture of Ethan's success, but they had forgotten the details. They had forgotten the fine print, and in their haste to fund his dream, they had forgotten one crucial thing. My parents, Robert and Linda, were masters of appearances. They lived in a sprawling house in a manicured suburb, drove leased luxury cars, and held memberships at the right country club. To the outside world, they were the picture of success. Robert, a self-styled consultant, who mostly managed a handful of inherited commercial properties, and Linda, an interior decorator with a flair for convincing people to spend a fortune on beige furniture. Their life was a carefully curated exhibit of upper-middle-class prosperity, and at the center of this exhibit was their son, Ethan. From the moment he was born, Ethan was not just a child, he was a project, a reflection of their own aspirations. He was charming, handsome, and effortlessly popular. They mistook his charisma for character and his glibness for genius. They poured resources into him, private sports coaches, expensive summer camps, a brand new car the day he turned 16. Every fleeting interest was hailed as a sign of burgeoning talent. When he declared he wanted to be a musician, a state-of-the-art guitar appeared. When he dabbled in photography, a professional-grade camera was his birthday gift. My path was quieter and therefore less valued. I was the scholar, the reader, the planner. My achievements were academic, private things, a perfect GPA, a victory on the debate team, an acceptance letter to a prestigious pre-law program. They were proud of these things, but in a distant, abstract way, the way one is proud of a well-behaved but unexciting pet. My successes didn't have the same public-facing glamour as Ethan's supposed potential. I was the reliable bedrock, and he was the dazzling statue they were determined to build upon it. The college fund was the perfect example of this. It had been set up by my mother's parents, Grandma Rose and Grandpa Joe. They were practical people, children of the Depper Eshen who believed in the transformative power of education. They had watched me grow, saw my love for books and my fierce sense of justice, and they wanted to give me the one thing they never had, a future free from financial worry. The trust was ironclad, or so I thought. Its sole purpose was for my postgraduate education. My parents were the custodians, tasked with protecting it. Instead, they saw it as just another asset to be leveraged for their favorite project. I remembered the day my grandfather sat me down just before he passed away. I was 12. He'd shown me the paperwork, explaining what it was for. "This is for you, Angela," he had said, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't let anyone ever tell you your dreams aren't a good investment." Now, the very people entrusted to protect that legacy had plundered it. Their justification was a masterclass in self-deception. When I tried to have a calm, rational conversation with them a few days after the initial announcement, they presented a united, impenetrable front. We sat in the living room, the same room where they had shattered my world just nights before. I had my arguments prepared, notes on the legal and moral implications of their actions. The fund was established by Grandma and Grandpa for a specific purpose, I began, my voice steady. It's not just a pile of money, it was their legacy for me. My father waved a dismissive hand. "Angela, your grandparents were wonderful people, but they were from a different time. A law degree is a piece of paper. An international brand," he said, his eyes gleaming, "that's a modern empire. Ethan is building an asset." "He's taking pictures for social media," I countered. "There's no business plan, no revenue model, it's a fantasy." This is where my mother leaned in, her expression a mixture of pity and condescension. "Honey, you're a planner, we get that. But some people, the truly special ones, they're visionaries. They don't follow a map, they draw it. Your brother has that spark. We have to nurture it. It would be irresponsible not to." And then came the introduction of the primary antagonist, though I didn't know it at the time. Ethan, in his infinite wisdom, had acquired a business mentor. His name was Julian Vance, a man Ethan had met at some fleeting networking event. Julian was, according to Ethan, a serial entrepreneur and digital nomad guru. He came over for dinner the week before Ethan's departure. Julian was polished, probably in his late 30s, with a tan that looked too perfect for our overcast state and teeth that were blindingly white. He spoke in a dizzying cascade of buzzwords: synergy, disruption, monetization, paradigm shifts. He complimented my mother's decorating, my father's supposed business acumen, and most of all, Ethan's raw, untapped potential. "This young man is a content goldmine," Julian said, gesturing at Ethan with a forkful of my mother's pot roast. "The market for authentic travel narrative is exploding. With the right seed capital to establish a premium brand from day one, his ROI will be astronomical." My parents were eating it up, their faces glowing with vicarious ambition. I watched Julian, however, and saw something else. His eyes were constantly scanning the room, taking in the expensive art on the walls, the silver candlesticks on the mantelpiece. When he asked about our family, his questions were subtly pointed, aimed at our financial standing. "It's so refreshing to see a family that isn't afraid to invest in their own," he'd said, looking directly at my father. "So many people are risk-averse. They cling to old-fashioned assets like education trusts." The comment was so specific, so surgical, that it couldn't be a coincidence. He knew. Ethan had told him everything. This wasn't just my family's delusion. It was being fueled by a grifter. a polished, well-spoken predator who had identified my parents' blind spot, their adoration for their son, and was using it to his own advantage. He was the one who had likely planted the seed, framing the theft of my future as a savvy business move. He turned to me, his smile slick. "And Angela, what about you? What are your plans?" "I'm going to law school," I said, meeting his gaze. He chuckled. "Excellent, the world always needs good lawyers. Someone has to read the fine print, right?" I just smiled back. "Exactly." The week of Ethan's departure was a whirlwind of activity that I observed from a distance. Suitcases, new camera gear, and travel guides littered the house. My parents were giddy, bustling around Ethan like courtiers attending a young prince. They were so absorbed in the fantasy of his impending stardom that they barely noticed my quiet withdrawal. I still felt the sting of their betrayal, a dull, constant ache. But beneath it, something else was taking root: resolve. The turning point came not with a dramatic confrontation, but in the sterile silence of the University L. Library. I was supposed to be studying for a midterm, but my mind kept replaying Julian Vance's slick, self-satisfied smile and my father's proud, booming declaration of his investment. An investment, the word echoed in my head. They had framed this as a financial transaction, a calculated risk for a high reward, and that's when it clicked. They had chosen to operate in the world of finance and business, a world governed by rules and regulations. My world. They just didn't know it yet. I pushed my constitutional law textbook aside and opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in a query I already knew the answer to: IRS federal gift tax limit. The screen illuminated the clear, unambiguous language of the tax code. There it was, in black and white. For the current tax year, an individual could give up to $18,000 to any other person without any tax implications or reporting requirements. A married couple, like my parents, could combine their allowances to give one person, Ethan, up to $36,000. The amount they had given him was $80,000. That meant they had gifted him $44,000 over the legal limit. This wasn't a gray area. It wasn't open to interpretation. They had a legal obligation to file IRS Form 709, the United States gift and generation skipping transfer, tax return, and would likely have to pay a substantial tax on that excess amount. The tax rate on taxable gifts could be as high as 40%. That meant a potential tax bill of over $17,000. And that didn't even account for the penalties and interest that would accrue for failing to file and pay on time. My heart started beating faster. This was it. This was the clever trap they had laid for themselves. Their arrogance and financial ignorance were my leverage. They had dismissed my chosen field as boring and predictable, yet that very knowledge was about to become their undoing. My initial plan was simple: wait, let them marinate in their blissful ignorance. But as I thought about the smarmy confidence of Julian Vance, a new, more proactive idea began to form. Julian had clearly manipulated them. He had coached them, fed them buzzwords, and made them feel like savvy investors. What if he had a history of this? My pre-law program came with a subscription to several powerful legal and public records databases, tools I was supposed to be using for case study research. On a hunch, I started with Julian Vance. His online presence was carefully curated: a slick personal website, a LinkedIn profile littered with grandiose job titles at companies that seemed to have no other employees, and an Instagram feed of him posing in various exotic locales. It was all surface, no substance. So I dug deeper. Using the university's access to LexisNexis, I started searching for his name in court records and public filings. It took hours, sifting through common names and irrelevant traffic violations. But then I found it. A civil suit filed 3 years ago in Arizona. A family had accused a financial guru named Julian Vance of convincing them to liquidate their retirement savings to invest in his new can't-miss tech startup. The startup vanished, along with their money. The case was settled out of court, with the details sealed. My blood ran cold. He was a predator. I kept digging. Another search, this time through news archives, brought up a small article from a local paper in Florida from 5 years prior. It was about a group of elderly residents in a retirement community who had been swindled by a charismatic young man selling shares in a bogus real estate development. The man's name wasn't Julian Vance, but the photo accompanying the article was unmistakable. The smile was the same, the eyes just as predatory. He had been using an alias. This changed everything. This wasn't just about my parents' foolishness anymore. They were victims of a professional con artist. My plan shifted. It was no longer just about teaching my parents a lesson. It was about exposing a fraud. I began to meticulously document everything. I saved screenshots of Julian's social media, downloaded the court filing from Arizona, and saved the article from the Florida newspaper. I created a timeline, cross-referencing dates and locations from his online posts with the public records. A clear pattern of deception and predatory behavior began to emerge. My quiet anger had sharpened into a focused, calculated strategy. I had the law on my side, and now I had the evidence to back it up. I wasn't just a spurned daughter anymore. I was an investigator building a case, and I would wait for the perfect moment to present it. The day of Ethan's departure was a spectacle of forced emotion. My mother cried, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief while my father clapped Ethan on the back, offering booming, vague advice about disrupting the digital space. Ethan, for his part, looked like a kid on Christmas morning, high on the validation and the sheer, intoxicating free. Dom of it all. Julian Vance was there, of course, overseeing the proceedings like a proud director. I played my part. I gave Ethan a brief, stiff hug and wished him well. "Be safe," I said, the words feeling hollow and inadequate. "Don't worry about me, sis," he said, flashing a grin. "Worry about how you're gonna handle me being famous." I didn't have to feign a smile. A real one, small and sharp, touched my lips. "Oh, I think I'll manage." My chosen moment for the first, subtle confrontation came 2 weeks later. The house was quiet, eerily so. The vibrant energy, or rather, the chaotic energy that always surrounded Ethan, was gone. My parents seemed to be at a loss, wandering the halls like deposed monarchs. Their grand project had been launched, and now they had nothing to do but wait for the returns. I found my father in his home office, staring at a spreadsheet on his computer with a furrowed brow. He was trying to make sense of the new dent in their finances, I suspected. The transfer of $80,000 wasn't a small thing, even for them. "Hey, Dad," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Got a second? I have a question about something from my tax law class." He looked up, grateful for the distraction. "Of course, Angie. What's on your mind?" I walked in and sat in the leather chair opposite his desk. I kept my tone light, academic, and curious. "We were just going over gift taxes," I began, and I was a little confused about the specifics. "I know there's an annual exclusion, but what happens if someone gives a gift that's much larger than that? Say, to a family member." My father's expression didn't change. He puffed out his chest slightly, always happy to play the role of the wise businessman. "Well, that's just a formality, really. It's all within the family. The government doesn't need to get involved in how a parent chooses to support their child." Bingo, utter blissful ignorance. "Oh," I said, feigning confusion. "But the textbook says any gift over the exclusion amount has to be reported on a Form 709, even if no tax is immediately due because of the lifetime exemption. It says the penalties for not filing are pretty steep." I watched him closely. A flicker of something, annoyance, uncertainty, crossed his face before he masked it with a confident chuckle. "Angela, those rules are for billionaires trying to hide fortunes offshore. This was an investment, an intra-family transfer to fund a startup. It's a completely different category." "An investment in what exactly?" I pressed gently. "Is Ethan's brand a registered LLC? Did you get shares in his company in exchange for the capital?" He waved his hand dismissively. "Don't get bogged down in technicalities. It's a family business. Julian explained it all. This is seed funding. It's not a gift in the traditional sense. Julian explained it, I repeated, letting the name hang in the air. Did he happen to offer that advice in writing, as a professional consultant? My father's face began to harden. What's with all these questions, Angela? It sounds less like a class assignment and more like an interrogation. I'm just trying to understand, I said, my voice soft. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you and Mom gave Ethan an $80,000 gift. And if you didn't report it, you've broken federal tax law. I'm worried about you. The mask of the savvy investor crumbled, replaced by the face of a father whose authority had been questioned by his own child. That's enough, he snapped, his voice sharp. Julian is an expert. He knows this landscape inside and out. He assured us this was the best way to structure the deal to ensure maximum flexibility for Ethan. It's handled. He was lying. Or rather, he was repeating the lies Julian had fed him. The blustering tone, the immediate defensiveness, it was all the confirmation I needed. They hadn't filed a thing. They hadn't even considered it. Julian had likely told them that calling it an investment was a magic loophole, a way to bypass any inconvenient regulations. I stood up. Okay, Dad, I'm sorry if I upset you. He just grunted, turning back to his screen, his shoulders tense. As I walked out of the office, the pieces of my plan began to lock into place. The confrontation had been perfect. I hadn't accused them directly, I had simply presented the facts which my father had arrogantly dismissed. When the letter from the IRS eventually arrived, he wouldn't initially suspect me. He would suspect his own ignorance, or better yet, he would blame the expert who had led him astray. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was spring it. With the evidence of their tax blunder confirmed by my father's own ignorant blustering, it was time to take the next step. It felt both momentous and clinical. From the anonymous bubble of a campus computer lab, I navigated to the IRS website. I found the page for Form 3949A, the Information Referral Form. It's a tool for citizens to rep. Ort suspected tax fraud. My heart pounded as I filled it out. I kept the information concise and factual. I stated that a married couple, Robert and Linda, had made a cash gift of $80,000 to their son, Ethan, for the purpose of funding a personal trip. I provided their names, address, and the approximate date of the transaction. I didn't mention my relationship to them. I was just a concerned citizen. I wrote that the parties involved seemed to believe that classifying the gift as a business investment exempted them from reporting it, and that they had been advised by a so-called financial guru named Julian Vance. I attached the documents I had found, the Arizona court case, the Florida News article. I suggested that Julian Vance might be a subject of interest for a larger pattern of financial misdeeds. I hit submit. There was no confirmation, no fanfare, just a quiet return to the IRS homepage. I closed the browser, took a deep breath, and walked out of the library into the crisp autumn air. The deed was done. Now, the gears of bureaucracy would begin to turn, slowly but inexorably. For the next 2 months, life settled into a strange new normal. Ethan's updates from abroad were sporadic. His initial posts were glossy and triumphant, him posing on a beach in Thailand, a drone shot of a bustling market in Vietnam. My parents would proudly show me these pictures on their iPads, their faces beaming. Look at him, Angela, he's a natural. But I noticed a subtle shift over time. The professional-looking photos became less frequent, replaced by grainy selfies. The captions, once filled with inspirational quotes about living authentically, started to carry a whining undertone, complaints about bad Wi-Fi, lost luggage, and the unexpected expense of it all. The investment was, predictably, not yielding any returns. The first sign of trouble arrived in a thin, unassuming envelope. It was standard government tissue, with the telltale IRS return address in the corner. I saw it in the mail pile when I got home from class. My mother was standing in the kitchen, staring at it with a puzzled expression. "That's odd," she said, holding it up. "They've never sent us a letter before. It's usually just our refund check." Probably just a standard notice about tax code changes. My father called out from the living room, not looking up from his newspaper. Toss it on my desk. I watched her place the letter on the corner of his mahogany desk, a tiny white time bomb waiting to go off. For 2 days, it sat there, untouched. Then, on a Saturday morning, I heard my father's voice from his office, tight with annoyance. "Linda, come in here, look at this nonsense." I lingered in the hallway, pretending to look for a book on the shelf. "What is it?" she asked. "It's a letter from the IRS," he said, his voice a low grumble. "A notice of unreported taxable events. They're asking about a large financial transfer this year. This is ridiculous. It must be a mistake." A mistake? How could they make a mistake like that? Bureaucratic incompetence, that's how. They probably mixed us up with someone else. I'll call them on Monday and straighten it out. Some paper pusher in a cubicle who doesn't understand how modern finance works. But his voice lacked its usual booming confidence. There was a tremor of unease beneath the bluster. The untouchable bubble they lived in had just been pricked. The situation escalated a week later. A second, thicker envelope arrived. This one was sent via certified mail, requiring a signature. It was an official notice of an audit. They were being instructed to provide full financial records for the year, with a specific focus on the $80,000 transfer. The penalties for noncompliance were listed in stark, unforgiving detail. This time, there was no dismissing it as a mistake. Panic began to set in. That evening, the house was thick with a tense, panicked silence, a stark contrast to the celebratory toasts of a few months prior. I was in my room, trying to study, when the shouting started. "How could this happen, Robert?" My mother's voice was high and strained. "You said it was handled. You said Julian knew what he was doing." "Julian did know. This has to be something else. This can't be about Ethan's fund." "What else could it be? It's the exact amount. Did that man lie to us?" The name I had been waiting for had finally entered the equation. I walked to my door and opened it slightly. My father was pacing the living room, his face pale. My mother was sitting on the sofa, twisting her hands in her lap. "I'm going to call him," my father declared. "I'll call Julian right now and get to the bottom of this." He stabbed at his phone, putting it on speaker. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, a flat, automated voice, "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." He tried again, same result. A cold, hard dread washed over my father's face. He pulled up his email, his fingers trembling slightly as he typed. He sent a frantic message to the email address Julian had used. An automated reply appeared almost instantly. "Delivery status notification, failure, address not found." Julian Vance had vanished. The digital nomad guru, the expert in modern finance, had disappeared into the very digital ether he claimed to have mastered. He had taken their trust, fed their egos, and then cut them loose the moment his bad advice came back to bite them. My mother let out a small, wounded sound. "He's gone. Robert, that man is gone, and the IRS is auditing us." It was at that moment that Ethan, still struggling with his dwindling funds in a hostel somewhere in Laos, chose to call. My father answered, his face a mask of fury and desperation. "Dad, my main camera lens just broke, and I need you to wire me another $2,000. The content well is running dry here." My father snapped. "Money? You want more money? Your little investment is about to cost us a fortune in taxes and penalties. We are being audited by the IRS, Ethan. Audited." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. For the first time, the consequence of his fantasy trip had become real. The spell was broken. The dream had collided with the harsh, unforgiving reality of a federal tax audit. The weeks following the audit notice were a slow-motion descent into chaos. My parents hired a tax attorney, a balding, perpetually stressed man who spoke in grim, hushed tones. The initial consultation alone cost them a small fortune. I overheard snippets of their frantic phone calls, words like non-disclosure penalties, substantial liability, and potential for fraud investigation. The fantasy of their son's influencer empire had been replaced by the nightmare of legal and financial ruin. They tried to rationalize it, to find someone, anyone, to blame. They blamed the IRS for being overzealous. They blamed their old accountant for not giving them a preemptive warning. Most of all, they blamed the ghost, Julian Vance, the slick con artist who had validated their worst instincts and then vanished. The one person they didn't blame, at least not yet, was me. I was a ghost in my own house, a silent observer they mostly ignored. In their panic, they had forgotten my quiet questions, my feigned academic curiosity from weeks before. To them, I was just the bookish, irrelevant daughter, incapable of understanding, let alone influencing, their high-stakes world. The climax arrived on a dreary Tuesday night. I was in my room, finalizing an application for a summer internship at a prestigious law firm when my father knocked on the door. He didn't wait for an answer, just pushed it open. My mother stood behind him. Their faces were haggard, etched with sleepless nights and profound anxiety. "Angela," my father said, his voice stripped of all its usual bluster. It was thin, weary. "We need to talk to you." I turned from my laptop, my expression neutral. "What is it?" They came in and stood awkwardly in the center of the room. It was my mother who spoke, her voice trembling. "The lawyer, he laid it all out for us today. The taxes, the penalties for failing to file, it's bad, Angela. It's tens of thousands of dollars." "And that's the best-case scenario," my father added, his voice hollow. "If they decide to pursue fraud charges because of the investment claim, we could lose everything." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "You were right. From the beginning, you were right." This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment of their complete and total surrender to the reality they had for so long ignored. "It was always a gift," I said, my voice calm and even. "You took money that was meant for my education and gave it to Ethan for a vacation. You called it a business deal to make yourselves feel better about it. But the law doesn't care about your feelings. The law cares about the facts." My father flinched as if I had struck him. "We know that now," he said, his voice cracking. "Angela, you're smart. You understand this stuff. The lawyer, he's good, but he's expensive, and he talks to us like we're criminals. We were hoping maybe you could look at the paperwork, see if there's a way out of this. An appeal, a loophole, anything." It was so perfectly, tragically ironic. They had dismissed my ambition, plundered the funds meant to achieve it, and now, in their moment of desperation, they were turning to me, begging me to use the very expertise they had so casually devalued to save them from themselves. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. I watched the hope drain from their faces, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a bomb. "What?" my mother whispered. "No," I repeated, a bit stronger this time. "I will not help you. That investment, as you called it, was your decision. The consequences of that investment are also yours. You told me that Ethan's path was the future, and that my path was safe and predictable. You told me I would land on my feet. Well, I have. I'm applying for scholarships. I'm taking out loans. I will build my own future on my own terms." I stood up and walked over to my desk, where I picked up the small, framed photo of my grandparents that I kept there. I held it up. This money was from them. It was their belief in me. You betrayed their trust, and you betrayed mine. You didn't just give Ethan my money. You told me in no uncertain terms that his dreams were more important than mine. You can't put a price on that, but the IRS has apparently put a price on your recklessness. And you will pay it. My father stared at me, his face a mixture of disbelief and dawning fury. "You did this," he breathed. "That phone call that day in my office. You knew this would happen. You reported us." I didn't confirm or deny it. I just met his gaze, my expression unyielding. I let him believe it. Let him finally understand that my knowledge, the knowledge he had belittled, was more powerful than he could ever imagine. "The investment and its consequences are entirely your own," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. "I suggest you listen to your lawyer." With that, I turned back to my laptop, to my scholarship applications, to the future I was now building for myself. Behind me, I heard my mother let out a strangled sob. The showdown was over. I had exposed their folly not with shouting or tears, but with the quiet, devastating power of the law they had chosen to ignore. Their downfall was complete, and it was entirely of their own making. The aftermath was a landscape of quiet ruin. To pay the initial tax bill and the steep penalties, my parents had to do the one thing their pride could barely withstand. They had to sell assets. Not the leased cars or the country club membership. Those were essential props for their public image. Instead, they sold a small commercial property that my father had inherited, a steady, unglamorous source of income that had been quietly paying their bills for years. It was a classic case of sacrificing a real asset to cover the loss from a phantom one. The financial strain created fissures in their united front. The house, once filled with their mutual adoration for Ethan, now echoed with hushed, bitter arguments. My father's blame shifted from Julian to my mother, accusing her of being the one who was so blinded by Ethan's charm. She, in turn, accused him of being a financial fool, taken in by a common swindler. Their carefully constructed world was crumbling from the inside out. As for Ethan, his great Asian adventure came to an ignominious end. The final wire transfer from our parents never came. Stranded in Bali with a broken camera lens and a dwindling bank account, he was forced to sell his drone and his remaining gear to buy a one-way ticket home. He returned not as a conquering influencer, but as a chastened, defeated young man. He was thinner, sunburnt, and all the swagger had been stripped from him, replaced by a sullen resentment. He couldn't grasp the enormity of the financial crisis he had triggered. He only knew that his dream had been cut short. He moved back into his old room, the silence between him and my parents a testament to their shared, monumental failure. Meanwhile, my life was moving in the opposite direction. My quiet, diligent work paid off. I received a significant academic scholarship, and my application for the prestigious summer internship was accepted. I secured a modest student loan to cover the remaining tuition, the terms of which I understood perfectly. My future was no longer a gift from my grandparents, but something I had forged myself through grit and determination. In a way, it meant even more. The final, heartfelt reconciliation I might have once dreamed of never happened. There was no tearful apology, no grand moment of realization from my parents. Their pride was too deeply wounded. But something else happened, something quieter and perhaps more meaningful. A few weeks before I was set to move out for my summer internship, my mother knocked on my door. She didn't enter. She just stood in the doorway, looking tired and older than I had ever seen her. "I found this when I was cleaning out the attic," she said, holding out a small, dusty box. "It was your grandmother, S." I took the box. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a simple, elegant fountain pen. It was the pen Grandma Rose had used to sign all her important documents, the one she'd told me she would give me when I passed the bar exam. "She would have been very proud of you, Angela," my mother said, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't bring herself to apologize for what she'd done, but in that small gesture, in that quiet admission, I understood. She was acknowledging the value of the world she had dismissed. She was conceding defeat. I, too. "Kay the pen. Thank you," I said. It was all that needed to be said. I moved out a month later, leaving them to the quiet wreckage of their lives. The last I heard, my father had taken a full-time job, a real one, with a boss and a 400 one, Kay, for the first time in 20 years. Ethan was working at a local coffee shop, the entrepreneurial, trip-a-bitter memory he refused to talk about. They were surviving, but the dream was gone. I, on the other hand, was thriving. My life was my own, built on a foundation of my own making. The antagonist wasn't just my parents or Julian or even Ethan. It was their willful ignorance, their belief that glamour was more valuable than substance. And in the end, that was the antagonist I had truly defeated. I had found my own peace, my own vindication, not in revenge, but in the quiet, unassailable triumph of my own competence.